Yeah, that's fine. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first ever Chirp Reviews. My name is Chirp, and I have no credentials, but I hope you like my opinions anyway. We're going to start off this new age of the channel with one that might seem a bit odd. Dawnsbury Days, an indie CRPG using the Pathfinder 2nd edition rules as its basis. I figured this allows me to channel my current hyperfixation, Pathfinder, into kickstarting my videos again. In Dawnsbury Days, you create a party of 4 adventurers known as the Dawnsbury 4. You can choose to play pre-generated versions of the characters, or create your own. There's 14 classes to pick from, tons of subclasses, and an insane amount of character creation options. You'll just have to suspend your disbelief a little bit if you decide to change the orc into an elf or something, because the voice lines don't change. You play up to level 4, doing 6-ish encounters at each level. I got about 8 hours of gameplay for just the story mode. In addition to that, there's a selection of additional scenarios that don't quite fit the story, adding another 4 hours or so. The presentation of character tokens, animations, and battle maps is very much based on what you could expect from a virtual tabletop like Roll20 or Foundry. It has a lot of amateur charm. The character tokens are hand-drawn. The voice actors appear to have been recruited via casting call in the Pathfinder community. It's all very quaint, if not the prettiest game I've seen. For the gameplay itself, it's using a slightly rules-light version of Pathfinder 2e. This is a cousin to Dungeons & Dragons. So at its core, you decide what you want to do, roll a 20-sided dice, and add modifiers to that dice result to see if you succeed. Explaining the full concept would be a lot, but thankfully there was a little game called Baldur's Gate 3 that came out recently, so people should be aware of the concept. The core rule system is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for how enjoyable this game is. In Dawnsbury, there's no exploration or decisions to be made out of combat. After a brief cutscene, you're dropped into an encounter, initiative is rolled, and the fight commences. You get 3 actions during your turn that you can use to move, attack, or complete special actions. Attacking more than once during your turn causes a massive debuff called the multi-attack penalty, or MAP. Another defining mechanic of this system is the 4 degrees of success. Instead of critting only on a 20, or crit failing on a 1, these happen if you pass the check by +10, or fail it by -10. And this applies to everything, from grappling and intimidation to fireballs and arrows. This makes modifiers extremely powerful. If your opponent is off guard, -2, and your character has a +1 from Bless, suddenly your rogue has a +15% chance to crit. These mechanics work together to make interesting decisions happen on each turn instead of having a fairly set rotation. For instance, my rogue's turn could be to stay back, use hide to put the enemy off guard, then shoot. Doing that in the reverse, shooting then hiding, makes it so instead she's safe for a turn. The reason I chose to attack at range, despite having stronger melee, making the enemy come to you makes them waste actions on moving. Once they've moved in, on her second turn, she can move in with her much stronger rapier. If there's already an ally there providing flank support, maybe she spends that spare action attempting to demoralize the foe. Otherwise, feint allows her to temporarily put an enemy off guard. Then, maybe running away is a good idea. Or perhaps staying in melee to help allies get flanking bonuses on their turn is a better plan. It's very rare you have a turn where you don't feel like you're making a decision. I must add on, some of the things excluded from the main system are rough. A lot of the skills are effectively worthless, to the point in the character creator it warns you, This does nothing in Dawnsbury. I would have loved to see stuff like recall knowledge properly implemented, hiding the enemy stats until you make a successful check to unlock them. I can see why it's excluded though, since it's typical for you to have 100% knowledge of your enemies in a CRPG. Any kind of ledges or elevation is excluded as well, which removes some tactics players of Pathfinder will notice. That said, Dawnsbury has some interesting special scenarios to mix up the combat encounters. In one, enemies would keep spawning until you used skill actions to close a gate. One I really enjoyed had a fire aura acting as a timer. So if your party was speedy, you could run around collecting the keys to escape, but if you had a character with strong enough bludgeoning attacks, you could destroy the altars, allowing you to take the primary objective at a more leisurely pace. Lots of clever ideas you've seen in tabletop encounters. Some of these were a bit misleading though. For instance, one had you activate 4 altars in 4 rooms. It seemed like capturing these altars would trigger the win, or at the very least give you an extra ally. So I focused on controlling enemies and rushing to these altars. In reality, you could ignore the altars until the fight ended, and were better off taking it slow, picking off enemies one by one. The limited interface caused occasional issues. Hazards weren't very clear, as an example. If an enemy used web, and you didn't know what web did, you'd have no idea what stepping on those squares would do. It could be difficult at times to tell if a square was decoration or rough terrain. Just a lot of stuff like that. The game would benefit greatly from a way to hover over a tile, press a button, and get an explanation of effects on that tile. They already have a super helpful tab function that does this for cover. A way to undo moving would also be helpful, so you could test ranges on spells and attacks. More than once I discovered that I was actually 35 feet away instead of 30, or that my cone didn't quite line up like I thought it would. I'd find myself counting out the squares, then counting from that square to see if I was going to be able to hit. This isn't even something I have to do playing actual Pathfinder on Foundry, so it feels a bit odd in a video game. As for the story, it's nothing special, but not bad either. Kind of the typical low-level adventure stuff you see in these games. Fight the kobolds, defeat the undead in the crypt to retrieve the relic. There's a lot of meta humor, like, yeah, I'm afraid of water. Have you seen the underwater combat rules? And meta talk in general, characters directly referencing game mechanics like actions. So if you're hoping to be immersed, this isn't that kind of game.
You're a monster!
On page 257 of the bestiary, to be exact. But it hardly matters. Power demands sacrifice.
I should talk a bit about the accessibility for new players. There is a tutorial that explains the super basics, but it doesn't get much further than what I described earlier. It tells you that you shouldn't attack more than once, but doesn't give examples of what you could do instead. It seems to assume you at least have an idea of how the PF2E system works. I think a little further tutorial explaining some basic tactics with the pre-made party would be much loved by someone new to Pathfinder. The character creator is pretty good at walking you through each step. It's pretty hard to mess up a character in this system. And the few things you could mess up the game warns you about, like reminding you to make sure you have at least a +3 in your main stat. And as I mentioned, the game does have pre-generated characters you could use on your first playthrough. So that part is fairly noob-friendly at least. So, without further ado, let's get to the rankings, which I did not explain yet. In this series, we'll be doing 5 separate scores. Uniqueness for how different it is from other games. Quality for how well it's made, graphics-wise and functionality-wise. Value, which is how much game you get for your buck. Fun, which is just my personal enjoyment of the game. And time, covering how much it respects your time. I'll put up a more detailed video of this scoring system later, but for now, to the rankings. First, uniqueness. This is the only CRPG using Pathfinder's 2nd edition rules as of me making this video. There is another currently getting kickstarted, but you know how Kickstarters go. So if you're specifically looking for a PF2E game, this would be a 10 out of 10. But I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. It's not like the CRPG genre is bloated, but there are other games, though this one is unique enough to stand out from its peers. Next is quality, and man did this make me rethink my ranking. On a coding front, this game is practically flawless. Everything I tried just worked. It was snappy. On the other hand, the limited interface did cause me to have a little less knowledge than I'd like. Also, the UI is very early 2000s, Flash game vibes. Which, don't get me wrong, is super cute and I loved it, but 6 out of 10. I mean, this game was $5. The main story is 8 hours. You can get at least 2 or 3 replays with different classes if you wanted. There's the free encounter mode with the extra combats. Once you add on the modding scene with even more encounters, easy 10/10. For fun, I had a good time with it. I found myself locked in and played it from start to finish without taking breaks with other games. It's not the sort of thing I'm going to rave about and run back to, though. Especially since it wasn't able to take full advantage of the stuff Pathfinder normally can, like verticality. 7 out of 10. Oh yeah, it 100% respects your time. Everything is skippable. Loading screens are snappy. Restarting combat is immediate. If you want to just do a quick encounter, you can be in with characters selected within seconds. The encounters themselves don't overstay their welcome. 10 out of 10, no notes. So, there we go. Here's the first ever Chirp review scores. A couple 10 out of 10s on there, which I promise won't be the norm. This game is a weird little outlier to kick off the series. Like, yes, the $5 game with quite a bit of replayability gets a 10 on value. Up next will be Monster Hunter Wilds, which should be a bit more typical. Click the subscribe button if you want to see that. If you have an upcoming game you'd like to see reviewed, drop it in the comments. It doesn't have to be a big release, as I hope I demonstrated here. And, I mean, that about wraps it up. Until next time, do I still say stay fresh?